to talk a little bit about how the US government has been trying to regulate Bitcoin. There have basically been two federal agencies that have been involved in the debate over whether and how to regulate Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The first is one that you probably never heard of before. It's called Fincen. Fincen stands for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's under the Department of Treasury. And the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network basically derives its authority from one law that was passed by US Congress. And that law is called the Bank Secrecy Act. Or BSA. The Bank Secrecy Act it's sort of a weird name because you would think that the Bank Secrecy Act, something with a name like that, would be all about protecting the secrecy of people's banking records. In fact, it's almost the opposite. The Bank Secrecy Act is concerned with instances where there might be too much secrecy around people's transactions, and in particular because the Bank Secrecy Act is aimed to help stamp out money laundering. Now, money laundering refers to the attempt to conceal the origins of where some money came from, to hide the origins of where some profit or proceeds or a pile of cash or some money in a bank account derived from. Now, why might you want to hide where your money came from? Well, if the money came from the proceeds of crime, if it came from, selling drugs or prostitution or other illicit activity, well, then you might want to sort of keep the police off your trail by concealing the origins of the money. If I'm, say, gonna go and buy some drugs, and I write a check to my drug dealer and then give the check to the drug dealer and the drug dealer deposits the check into his bank account, well, the police have all the information they need to find us, right? They've got my name and my address and his name and address and both of our bank account numbers. They can just go in there and freeze our bank accounts and show up at our doors with a warrant and arrest us. So if I'm a criminal type, I may want to launder my money before depositing it. One of the ways that I can do that, one of the classic ways of laundering money, is basically to exchange it for another kind of money or through another person or agent who isn't a criminal. The chief means of laundering money is through an exchange. So let's say that I take my criminal proceeds and somehow there's a record linking those proceeds to my partner in crime. But then what I do is I give some of those funds to my grandmother. And then I ask my grandmother to deposit the money into her account. And then later on, my grandmother takes the money out of her account and gives it to me. By exchanging it that way, I've laundered its origins. I've made it more difficult for the police to track my trail and come and get me. So the Bank Secrecy Act basically was passed by Congress, and Fincen was empowered by the Bank Secrecy Act to try to prevent money laundering. What we say is that Fincen is empowered to ensure that anti-money laundering takes place, that there are anti-money laundering provisions whenever there's any kind of banking or financial transaction. And anti-money laundering, we abbreviate AML for anti-money laundering. And these days, since 9/11, regulators also tack on 3 more letters to this. They tack on the letters CFT, which stands for Countering the Financing of Terrorism. Because in the world we live in today, it's not just drug dealers who are laundering money, it's not just international mastermind criminals, it's also terrorists who have other reasons for trying to hide the origins of their money if they're trying to save up a whole bunch of funds from a lot of people to conduct some kind of operation. So I know this is a lot of initials, and I have one more set of initials to go, but the BSA empowers Fincen to basically conduct AML-CFT, to set up policies and procedures for anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. One of the chief procedures they have is another 3-letter acronym. It's KYC. KYC stands for Know Your Customer. Basically, the Fincen regulations say that whenever you're going to engage in any kind of financial transaction, If you are a regulated entity like a bank or a money service business, something like a check cashing outlet, or interestingly, a Bitcoin exchange, you need to conduct KYC. You need to conduct Know Your Customer, which basically means you need to ask the client coming before you for some form of identification that's verifiable. You either need to ask them to give you their driver's license or prove their date of birth or their social security number, maybe a combination of a mailing address plus a phone number plus some other documentation, something so that you know who they are and that that identity stays tied to the transaction that takes place through your service. Now, what Fincen did when it looked at Bitcoin is it basically said, you know, as long as people are playing with Bitcoin in a completely Bitcoin universe where you're mining Bitcoins and then you're buying something from me with Bitcoins and then I buy something else from Joe with Bitcoins and then Joe takes those Bitcoins and buys something from Bob and Bob buys something in Bitcoins from Jane, as long as that's happening, there's not much that the Bank Secrecy Act can do here to regulate anything going on within the Bitcoin system. It's pretty much a sealed system. Bitcoin within that set of transactions maybe is being used for illicit activity, but there's no real easy way to catch it. What Fincen decided was, as long as people are completely within a Bitcoin universe or completely within the universe of one cryptocurrency, let them go nuts. They can do whatever they want. But as soon as they try to pop out of that world and into another form of money, into US dollars, or even into another cryptocurrency, into another online currency like World of Warcraft Gold or anything like that, as soon as that happens, well, it sure looks like they're engaging in exchange because they're taking Bitcoin and they're using a service to exchange it for US dollars. When that moment happens, there's the possibility for someone to be engaging in money laundering using the exchange as a way to hide their identity. So Fincen said, you can do Bitcoin all you want, but as soon as you pop out into other currencies, as soon as you enter the realm of exchange, then we have the authority under the BSA to regulate you, and we're going to regulate you as what's called a money service business or a money transmitter business. Again, they love three-letter acronyms. You are regulated as a money service business or a money transmitter business. Essentially the same thing. Another interesting thing from the point of view of the government, in the United States anyway, is there's a curious thing about MSBs and MTBs, and that is that they're not regulated just by the federal government. They're regulated on a state-by-state basis. So if you want to be a money transmitter and you want to operate in California, you need a license to operate in California. If you want to operate in California and New York, you need a license from both California and New York. If you want to operate in all 50 states, well then you need a license from every single state that regulates money transmitters, which I think is like 47 or 48 of the states, almost every single state. That places a really high barrier to entry into the exchange market if you want to be a money transmitter. So, because you'd have to spend all this money getting licensed state by state by state by state. Now, of course, in the world of the internet, as soon as you flip the button on, you're kind of connected everywhere. So in many ways, the Fincen ruling said, if you're going to be doing Bitcoin and you're going to be exchanging Bitcoin for any other currency, you've got to be licensed as a money transmitter business in every single state. Effectively, what that's doing right now is kind of squeezing out the little guys, squeezing out the smaller exchanges and services, and favoring the big ones that are able to operate at a national scale and that have the budget to get licensed as a money transmitter in every single state. Don has a question.
Yeah, you said something about needing to be licensed as a money transmitter business, but you're not talking about individuals. If an individual wants to exchange Bitcoin for dollars just for themselves, that's not what you're talking about, is it?
Right, that's right. Although it comes very close to being money transmission if an individual sets themselves up and says, look, you want to exchange your Bitcoin for dollars? I'll do it for you. And if it's not just you, Don, who wants to exchange your Bitcoin for dollars with me, but everyone in the class wants to do the same thing, then the regulator here would say that's dangerously close to becoming a money transmitter business, and you better call up your state licensing authority. Okay? So that's Fincen. it really is focusing on this AML-CFT problem. It's really focusing on exchange, and it's really focusing on trying to keep some control over where money originates and how it moves from person to person to person to person, because it's primarily concerned with money laundering. There's one other federal agency that's weighed in to the discussion so far on Bitcoin, and that is our friend, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. This is the tax agency in the United States. This is the agency that collects income taxes and taxes on other forms of property and the increase in valuation of property that takes place. And the IRS, of course, is interested in Bitcoin because if it's being used as a form of payment, if it's being used to generate income payments, or if it itself is increasing in value over time, well, then it should be subject to the tax law of the United States, and the US is going to want to collect revenue on that value. So what the IRS said is, for the purposes of us, we're not really going to weigh in on whether or not this is money. That's something that Fincen can worry about. For Fincen, when it pops out into an exchange, it sure looks like money transmission, so maybe it's money. We don't really care. What we care about is that this is a thing that has value. And if that value is increasing, and you're benefiting from that increase in value as an individual, well then we get a cut of that in the form of taxes. So what the IRS has said in its guidance on Bitcoin is that it's going to treat Bitcoin as a form of property. And just as you have to report on your tax forms every year increases in the value of your property, so too if, say, you've got a bunch of Bitcoin and its price rises in value, you've got to report that to the IRS. In the same vein, if someone pays you in Bitcoin, well, the IRS already has provisions for what happens if you're paid in an alternative currency. If you're paid in an alternative or complementary currency, something like the Ithaca hour, the IRS says, well, you've got to report that income, you've got to convert it into a dollar equivalent, so convert into a dollar equivalent. You've got to convert it into a dollar equivalent here, and then you've got to report it using the category barter. That's kind of interesting, because in a way, by mandating this, the IRS is stretching right back into the origins of money itself and saying, if you're getting any kind of value in a non-US government-issued currency kind of way, we're going to treat it just like income from barter. So Fincen is concerned with the origin point of the value and with the exchange and the possibility of money laundering. The IRS is concerned with the tax implications and is treating Bitcoin as a form of property. It's really interesting to dig into the regulatory documents issued by Fincen and the IRS and to note the points where they seem to be in agreement about what Bitcoin is and points where they seem not to be in agreement where what Bitcoin is, or there seems to be some kind of debate. This is obviously an unfolding conversation, both among people who use Bitcoin and among regulators who are trying to keep up with what's happening in this space.